But what is the single responsibility principle? The single responsibility principle, also known as the SRP, is one of the fundamental principles in software development. The single responsibility principle is one of 5 main solid principles, which are a set of design principles that aim to make software systems more maintainable, scalable, and easier to understand. The main premise of the single responsibility principle is that a class or module should have only one reason to change. In other words, a class or module should have a single responsibility and should be focused on doing one thing and doing it well. This principle promotes a high level of cohesion and helps in achieving code that is easier to understand, test, and maintain. For instance, this employee class violates the SRP due to this save method right here. This calculate salary method is obviously fine because it is directly tied to the employee themselves, but this saving to database logic should be done in a separate class so you can handle things like the database URL and maybe even the port that the database is on outside of the employee class because the database has nothing to do with the employee. In order to improve this class, we can move this saving to database logic into another class. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to make another class called class database, and we'll make this take in a constructor with the URL and the port of the database. And then we're going to go ahead and add these to the class. So we can say this.url, this.port. And then we're going to have our save method right here. And then we can take in a employee, which will set as type any right now because this isn't a real application. And then we can save the employee to the database in here. And then we could have a wrapper method in here, like this save method. Instead of doing the actual database logic in here, we can say const database equals new database localhost 3000, and then database.save this and then we'd construct the employee from there and then save it to the database. This is much better and a lot easier to maintain due to having our database functionality in a different class. If we were to have our database functionality in an employee class, someone who's never seen our code before would have to track down the database methods and implementations in the employee class instead of an easily named database class. The essence of the single responsibility principle can be understood by considering a real-life analogy. Imagine you have a Swiss Army knife, a multi-tool with multiple functions like a blade, screwdriver, bottle opener, etc. Each tool has its own specific purpose and they're all combined into one compact vise. Now let's say one of these tools becomes dull or needs to be replaced for some reason. According to the single responsibility principle, you would only need to replace one specific tool rather than replacing the entire knife. This separation of responsibilities makes the knife more modular, efficient, and easier to maintain. The single responsibility principle holds many benefits, but these are just some of the main ones that I've compiled into a list. The first and main reason to use the single responsibility principle is that it makes your code easier to read and understand. When a class or module has a single responsibility, its purpose becomes clear and concise. Developers can easily comprehend its functionality, reducing confusion and making it easier to read and understand the code base. This improves collaboration among team members and aids in onboarding new developers. The second reason to use the single responsibility principle is that it makes your code easier to maintain and extend. Classes or modules with a single responsibility are less likely to have complex and tangled code. This simplifies maintenance tasks since changes and bug fixes can be isolated to a specific area. Moreover, extending the system with new features becomes less error-prone as modifications are localized to relevant components. Overall, code bases adhering to SRP are more flexible and adaptable. The third reason to use the single responsibility principle is that your code becomes easier to test. Code that follows the SRP is generally more testable. With a single responsibility, it becomes easier to write focused unit tests that target specific behaviors. Tests are less likely to be affected by unrelated changes, reducing the effort required to maintain the test suite. This leads to more robust and reliable software. The fourth and final reason to use the single responsibility principle is that your code becomes easier to reuse. Well-designed classes or modules that adhere to the SRP are often more reusable. Since they focus on a specific responsibility, they can easily be plugged into different contexts or projects. This promotes code sharing and reduces the need for duplicating functionality. In order to apply the single responsibility principle into your existing projects and any upcoming projects, you should know these things. First of all, each class should of course have only a single responsibility. You should identify the core responsibility of the class or module and ensure it aligns with its purpose. You should avoid adding unrelated functionality that does not directly contribute to its primary responsibility. An example of attempting to apply this into your code would be with this user class. We can pretend that this has methods for now, although it really doesn't. Say I wanted to add a feature to save this user into a database. The first thing I might think about doing was just creating a save method and then saving the user to the database inside of that method. However, this would not adhere to the SRP, and it is generally a bad way to do things. For this to adhere to the SRP and be good, I would move the database functionality to a separate class so it could be reused, repurposed across multiple methods even in the user class, so I wouldn't have to repeat myself, which brings us into don't repeat yourself, another principle of software engineering. Another thing you should know while applying the SRP to your future code or your current code is separation of concerns. If a class or module starts to handle multiple responsibilities, consider extracting the additional responsibilities into separate classes or modules. This promotes loose coupling and improves code organization. So this business logic class here, this calculate salary, of course, adheres to SRP because it has to do with business logic. But these register employee and remove employee, while they do loosely relate to business logic, they are handling database operations, and they are not really related to the actual business logic. They're more related to users. So say, for example, we could make a new user class, or maybe even a user handler class, anything like that. And we could move these register, remove employee, and any other methods that deal with the employee into a separate class. This would help this code be better overall and also adhere to the SRP. In conclusion, the single responsibility principle, or SRP, is a powerful principle in software development that emphasizes the importance of focused, cohesive, and maintainable code. By adhering to the SRP, developers can create systems that are easier to understand, test, and extend. It contributes to the overall quality and longevity of software projects, making them more robust and adaptable to change. Remember, a class or module should have one reason to change, keeping things simple, modular, and efficient. Thank you for watching.